One thing I hear more often than you'd think goes something like this. I figured my body would bounce back, same as always, and I get it. When you've spent a lifetime being strong, capable, and not needing to worry about aches and pains, it's hard to flip that switch and realize things have changed. But here's what I want you to hear from someone who works with older men every day. Your body might not bounce like it used to, but it absolutely responds when you care for it. What looks like normal aging, the joint stiffness, the waking up tired, the tossing and turning at night, is often just years of wear and no maintenance. And the good news? Even a little care can go a long way. You don't need to turn into a marathon runner. You just need to give your body what it's been asking for. Because the truth is, the men I've seen ignore those signs for too long often regret it most when they're lying in bed at night, feeling trapped in their own body. I remember Frank clearly. He was 68, from Indiana, a retired construction foreman who came into my clinic limping and looking frustrated. He told me he'd never been the kind of man to complain. When something hurt, he pushed through it. That worked for decades. But over the last 2 years, he said his back had started bothering him after just a few minutes on his feet. He was sleeping poorly, waking up stiff, and even basic chores were starting to feel like a mountain. "Doc, I thought this stuff just happens when you hit a certain age," he said. But after some simple mobility checks and blood work, what we found was that Frank's body was exhausted, dehydrated, and tight from years of no stretching, no movement beyond lifting things, and very little sleep routine. I asked him to give me 10 minutes a day. He laughed at first. What's 10 minutes gonna fix? But he tried. A simple stretch for his lower back, drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, a short walk around the block after dinner. In 3 weeks, Frank was already walking more freely. In 2 months, he was sleeping through the night. He still had bad days, but he'd stopped saying, "I guess this is just my age." He started saying, "I didn't know I could feel this much better." What tends to help men most, especially when they're starting late, is keeping it embarrassingly simple. One of the easiest ways to help your body feel better, even if it's been years since you focused on your health, is to set a little structure. Pick a 10-15-minute routine that works every morning, even before breakfast. Gentle stretching while you're waiting on the coffee maker. Light ankle rolls while brushing your teeth. A slow lap around the house or down the driveway. Add a glass of water right after you wake up. It helps your blood pressure, your joints, even your digestion. If you take meds, set a daily reminder on your phone or kitchen clock so your body gets that rhythm back. It's not weakness, it's respect. You're building consistency, not perfection. Your body's not broken, it's just tired. And even small, quiet efforts can bring back that steady strength you remember. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, not anymore. But you can still move, still rest deeply, still enjoy a walk with your grandkid or a morning without pain. That's not a fantasy. That's something you build, one small step at a time. And I'm telling you from years of working with men just like you, it's never too late to feel a little more like yourself again. The second thing I'd like to talk about is something I've seen carry more weight than bad knees or high blood pressure, and that's regret over unspoken words. I've worked with older men for years, and a pattern I keep noticing is how many of them reach a point where they realize they didn't say, "I love you," often enough, or sometimes at all. For men raised in the 40s, 50s, even 60s, expressing love wasn't really encouraged. Providing, protecting, working hard, those were the ways you showed it. But here's the problem. As we get older, we realize that people don't always remember what we did. They remember how we made them feel. And sometimes what they needed most was something simple but direct, to hear that they were loved. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. I say it because I've seen what happens when that silence goes on too long, and how much lighter life becomes when we learn to speak even just a little more from the heart. I'll never forget Bill. He was 72 when I met him, living outside Houston, Texas. His wife had passed away suddenly a few months before, and when he came into my office, it wasn't about a health problem, not a physical one anyway. He just looked lost. He told me they'd been married over 40 years, raised 3 kids, moved house 5 times, lived through ups and downs, and yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd said, "I love you," out loud. She knew, he said at first, like a reflex, but a moment later, quieter, he said, "I hope she did." That sentence stuck with me. He said it while staring at the floor, like he was still talking to her somehow. Later in our sessions, he talked about how he thought doing things for his family, fixing the house, paying the bills, never complaining, was enough. And it was valuable. Of course it was. But now tell your son or your daughter you love them. If they're not around, write it in a card, send it anyway. If they've passed, say it aloud in a quiet room. It still counts. Words have weight, and they leave something behind. You don't have to become someone new to speak a little more from the heart. You just need to open the door a crack and let that message through. And even if it's been years, even if you've never been one for words, let me remind you, you still have time, and you still have people who need to hear your voice. A few honest words can change someone's entire week, or their memory of you, or even their life. You've earned the right to speak gently and boldly, and no matter how late it feels, love never gets old. Now here's another one that comes up more often than people admit. When a man reaches a certain point in life and realizes that everything he built, everything he fought for, came at the cost of forgetting who he was outside of work and responsibility. A lot of men I work with say the same thing. I don't know what I like anymore, or I don't even know who I'd be without my job. And I get that. For years, sometimes decades, your job gave you structure, purpose, a paycheck, and a role in the family. You were the provider, the rock, the one who showed up no matter what. But when retirement hits or the house gets quiet, many men realize they left their hobbies, their passions, and even their sense of identity behind, somewhere along the way. And it's not that you did anything wrong. You were doing what you thought was right. But now, you have a chance to rediscover what else makes you you. Let me tell you about Greg, 66 years old, from a small town in Ohio. Greg spent over 40 years working as a CPA, raised 3 kids, paid off a mortgage, and always made sure there was food on the table. He was the definition of reliable. But when he retired, he said the silence in his house hit him harder than he ever expected. No calls from clients, no paperwork to review, no deadlines, just quiet. And that quiet started to turn into something heavier. He told me, I spent all my time building a life for my family, but I never thought about what my life would look like once they didn't need me the same way. He wasn't bitter, just lost. I asked him if he had any old hobbies, and at first he said no. But then, like a light bulb flickering, he mentioned that he used to love woodworking when he was in high school, hadn't touched it in decades. We found a local community center that offered a basic workshop class just once a week. He agreed to try it. I saw him again a couple of months later, and he looked different, lighter. Turns out, I still know how to shape a decent coffee table, he said. But more than that, he started smiling when he talked about his week again. That spark, that was what had been missing. What often helps in this situation is starting, small, without pressure. Ask yourself what you used to enjoy doing just for yourself. Was it fixing engines, building birdhouses, playing piano, fishing, painting, writing, gardening? Pick one thing and give it 15 minutes a day, not to be productive, not to make money, just to be you. Join a local group if you're open to it, or start something quiet at home. Don't worry if you're rusty. The goal isn't to impress anyone. It's to reconnect with a part of yourself that's been waiting patiently. You don't need a 5-year plan to get back in touch with who you are. Sometimes all it takes is one small habit that belongs only to you, something that doesn't depend on being needed, hired, or asked for. You're still here. And that means there's still time to rediscover joy in your own company, your own creativity, your own rhythm. You gave so much to everyone else. Now it's okay to give a little back to yourself. Here's another one I've heard more times than I can count, and it usually comes out in a quiet voice, almost like the person's embarrassed to say it. Something like, I didn't think I'd end up feeling this alone. The truth is, as we get older, our social circle naturally shrinks. People move, friends pass away, routines change, and if we're not careful, we look up one day and realize we haven't had a real conversation, the kind that isn't about errands or health appointments, in weeks. The thing is, friendship isn't just nice to have at this stage of life. It's essential for mental health, for memory, even for physical well-being. The loneliness I see in older men isn't from lack of activity, it's from missing connection. The kind that only real friendship can offer. And the longer that loneliness sits there, the heavier it gets, especially at night when things are quiet. I remember Charlie, a retired mechanic from Minnesota, 70 years old. He came in for a blood pressure check, but we ended up talking for almost an hour about how restless he'd been feeling. He told me about his best friend from high school, Gary, how they used to fish together every summer, talk once a week by phone even when they lived in different cities. But then life happened. Marriage, kids, job changes, holidays missed, calls that got postponed. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years. I always meant to call, he said. I figured there'd be time. Then one morning, he looked Gary up and saw the obituary. He'd passed away the year before. Charlie said he sat at the kitchen table and just stared at the wall. I didn't even know he was gone. That realization crushed him. Not just because he missed Gary, but because he realized he'd been drifting from people, from connection, from the part of himself that laughed and opened up around others. That was the turning point. A few weeks later, Charlie told me he started striking up small conversations again, at the grocery store, at his church coffee hour, even with an old neighbor he hadn't spoken to in years. It's not the same as Gary, he said, but it reminds me I'm still part of something. What helps most in moments like this is not overthinking it, just start small. Pick up the phone and call one person you haven't talked to in a while. If that feels too hard, write a note or send a simple text. Drop by a community center, a library, a senior group. Not because you need a new best friend, but because putting yourself where people are can open doors. Even a smile or a short chat can warm up that part of you that might have gone quiet over the years. Rebuilding connection takes time, but it always starts with one move forward. There's a saying I go back to often: a man is rich who has a friend. You don't need a dozen people around you, but having even one or two real connections can change how your whole day feels. And the beautiful thing about friendship is that it doesn't expire with age. You're not too old, too late, or too anything to find your way back into someone's life, or let them into yours. You're not alone, even if it's felt like that lately. And there are people, even strangers right now, who would be lucky to know you. Here's one more that cuts deeper than most men expect. When you spend years believing that asking for help makes you weak, only to realize later that staying silent is what really wears you down. I've worked with a lot of men over 60, and I can tell you it's more common than you think. You grow up being told to tough things out, to keep your worries private, to deal with pain on your own, and that works for a while. But as life gets heavier, especially after loss or illness or big changes, that silence becomes its own burden. Your body can be hurting, your thoughts might be spiraling at night, and you still say, "I'm fine." Not because you are, but because you don't know what else to say. And I want to be clear here. Asking for help doesn't mean something's broken. It means you're human and you're allowed to need support. I remember Edward, 74, from Georgia. He came to me after a long stretch of what he called just feeling off. His wife had passed away the year before, and he said at first he kept himself busy, doing house repairs, watching the news, running errands, anything to avoid the quiet. But over time, the quiet started following him. He stopped answering his phone, skipped his regular coffee meetups, even let the garden go wild, something his wife used to love. His kids lived in other states, and while they checked in, he never let on that he was struggling. They've got their own lives, he told me. What good would it do to dump all this on them? What changed was his neighbor, a retired teacher named Lou, who noticed Edward hadn't been out for walks in weeks and finally knocked on his door. That knock led to a 10-minute talk on the porch, which led to a longer one the next day. And eventually Edward agreed to come see me. Not for medication, not for a diagnosis, just to talk. And we did, once a week, sometimes about grief, sometimes about music, sometimes just about the Braves game. The difference in his posture, his sleep, even his appetite was real, all because he let someone in. What often helps is starting with just one person. It doesn't need to be a therapist or a hotline, though those are great options. It could be a neighbor, a pastor, a friend, or even someone you trust at the local diner. Say one honest thing like, "I haven't been feeling like myself lately." Or, "It's been a tough few weeks." You don't need to explain everything. Just let that one thread out. It's usually enough to open a door. If you're ready, there are also support groups for grief, men's health, anxiety, some in person, some online. And no, you're not too old to start. You're exactly the age where it matters most. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. You've carried plenty already. Asking for help doesn't erase your strength. It proves it. You're not alone in this, even if it feels that way. There's always someone who'll listen. And sometimes the hardest step is also the kindest one, just saying out loud, "I need to talk." You'd be surprised how ready people are to walk beside you when you give them the chance. If even one of these topics spoke to you, let us know in the comments. Your opinion matters to us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss new videos that can help you live with more confidence. And most importantly, you are not alone. You still have time. You're stronger than you think. Life goes on if you choose to hold it by the hand.